Happiness. Written by Connor's Not Here and posted to the Fable SMP official Archive of Our Own account on March 6th, 2024. Ulysses tried to wipe the potion residue from his hands as he walked along the path. The obsidian was warm against his bare feet, the black glass having soaked up the sun in the dwindling day. He hoped his arrival at the Tuscleys wouldn't be inconvenient for the family. Indeed, part of him hoped that there had been some chore or task around the house he could help to complete. Something to take his mind off the confrontation with Axe the day before, which had been playing on repeat in his mind. Ulysses knocked as he stepped through the door, only to have his hand freeze as it connected it with the wood. Anybody home? Ulysses' eyes landed on possibly the last person he wanted to see after everything the day before. Lenarius was sitting easily at the kitchen table. His arms rested on the wooden surface as he listened to Wanda speaking across from him. The god's head turned slowly to face Atelkin, his dark eyes narrowing behind blue glasses. "Ulysses," Wanda said quickly, sitting up in her chair. "This is a pleasant surprise. Lord Lenarius was just stopping in. I believe you two know each other?" Ulysses nodded slowly, swallowing. Yeah, we've met. I'm sorry. I can come back another time. I didn't mean to... No, it's quite alright. I have some tea straining right now. I can pour you a glass if you'd like. Wanda, please, I wouldn't want to cause... Some tea would be lovely. Thank you, Mrs. Tuscley. With a small hand movement, Lenarius' words scrawled themselves in sapphire flames above the table, magically hanging in the air as both Ulysses and Wanda read them. The silent god smiled warmly at Wanda, who nodded in understanding. "Of course, Lord Lenarius." The Piglin woman stood up from the table and smoothed out her dress, moving to the kitchen and beginning to prepare the drinks. Lenarius also stood, his eyes moving back to Ulysses, who had not moved from the doorway. The scientist wasn't sure what to say, held in place by the god's gaze. What could he say, after everything that had happened since their last confrontation? After all the prayers? Wanda approached slowly, handing a glass of milky orange tea to both Ulysses and Lenarius. She looked between the two, soaking in the awkward pause. "If you would like, I can leave you two some time to speak alone," she asked after a moment, clearing her throat. "I can head to the studio Ulysses built me, or..." Ulysses shook his head. "No, Wanda, I wouldn't want to push you elsewhere if you're busy. I agree," Lenarius wrote between them. "Perhaps Dr. Themist and I should step outside for a moment." "Thank you for the curry, Mrs. Tuscley. It was wonderful." Wanda blushed slightly, waving the compliment aside. "Oh, of course, anytime. It's an honor to have you here." "The honor was all mine, I assure you," Lenarius wrote. Ulysses realized after a moment that Lenarius was writing his messages in Common rather than Piglin, making sure Ulysses could see what he was saying. The Tulkin wasn't sure if he was grateful or suspicious of the action. Lenarius turned to him, and the new words scrawled derailed his train of thought violently. "Shall we?" Ulysses nodded hesitantly, stepping back out the door he had only just walked through and watching as the god followed, towering over him in stature and presence. The two were silent for a long moment, waiting on the front porch of the house Ulysses himself had built, staring out over the front lawn. It would be incorrect to say that Lenarius broke the silence, but his magically written words were the first in the conversation. "You picked a nice spot for their home, between the nether portal and the sea. I can appreciate it." "What are you doing here?" Ulysses asked bluntly, gripping his glass so tight it threatened to slip from his trembling hands. The ice cubes floating in the tea rattled gently. Lenarius sighed. With more effort than would be expected from a god, he lowered himself and sat on the edge of the porch, looking out at the distant sea and the setting sun. "I am visiting those from my domain who live in this world. Very few reside here." Ulysses watched the words flicker and burn up in the air in front of him, curling like withering blue parchment. He glanced down. Lenarius was looking up at him expectantly. With an equal amount of effort from his tired, mortal body, the scientist sat down beside the god on the porch. Again, there was a pause where neither spoke. I am not trying to take them from you. Ulysses looked away. I didn't say you were. But that is what you're afraid of. Lenarius looked over his blue glasses curiously. Ulysses swallowed. Yes. Yes, it was. We have each robbed each other of their family once before. I do not wish to repeat that. Contrary to what you may believe, I do not wish to make your life worse. Yeah, well, it sure seems like it at times, Ulysses muttered. If you insist, was all the god wrote. Ulysses shook his head. I can't escape you, can I? Everywhere I turn, anything I try to make of myself, you're just always here. Always reminding me. I already told you that I was not here for you, Themist. The scientist nodded. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, God, there's so many things I wanted to ask you. All these decades of building up questions to ask, forming things I wanted to say to you, and I can't anymore. He waited for the god to speak in as many ways as he did. Instead, Lenarius continued to watch him with his dark eyes. Ulysses continued. I was so angry for so long. Angry and wrathful at everything, at existence, at myself, at you. Fuck, I was so angry at you. Are you not still? Len asked. Of course I am. Ulysses threw his arms out to his side, using it to brace himself on the porch as he leant back slightly. Fuck, yes, I am, or maybe I was. I don't know. I don't know anymore. I don't want to live like this, Lenarius. I don't want to live feeling nothing but anger and pain anymore. I want... Ulysses sighed. I don't know what I want anymore. I see, Lenarius said simply. The scientist leaned forward once again, resting his elbows on his knees and wrapping his hands around his glass, soaking in the cold of its surface. All of those prayers you sent me while I was gone. After so many years, you kept all of them. Lenarius nodded. Why did you send them to me? Ulysses' voice broke slightly as he asked the question which had been on his mind for months. Was it to taunt me? As some sort of revenge for Oscar, you just had to drag up all of those memories, rub it in my face how much my life fell apart from the very beginning. The god looked at him sadly for a moment before shaking his head. I sent them to show you that I never forgot you. I never ignored you. Ulysses let out a shaky breath. You never answered them. I did, sometimes, when I could. I gave the dead your comforts, as you asked. I suppose after a while, I assumed you just never received them, that maybe you cared so little about the Telkin, about me, that you just never listened. Lenarius looked away this time, taking a sip of his drink. I was always listening. It pained me to listen. It pained me to watch the youth I had such high hopes for fall so far. But I always received your prayers. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, Ulysses breathed. I'd almost forgotten about so many of those prayers. How much I used to adore you before all I could fear for anyone was rage. Lenarius watched him for a moment, considering the token. I received your last prayer too, he wrote. The token read the words over and over, contemplating them as they fizzled up. He nodded, thinking back to his confrontation with Axe and cringing. So you did send Victor after me, back at the lab, to watch me? Lenarius smiled, but shook his head. No, I did not send him after you. He sought you out on his own. What, you're saying I just attract undead things? Ulysses scoffed, shakily lifting the glass to his lips. The sweet spices of the tea soothed the lump forming in his throat. Lenarius chuckled. It was a strange thing to watch a silent god laugh. You do not attract the undead, Themist. You treat them with a kindness few in this realm offer. All creatures seek kindness, alive or otherwise. Ulysses wasn't entirely sure how to respond. He had spent his life waging war on the undead, finding more effective, more brutal ways of killing them. He had spent all of his fragmented memory dedicated to the destruction of any undead creature which found its way into his path, and despising the god who had created them. How could that same god imply he had treated the dead with kindness? I care about him, Ulysses said quietly. I love him, I suppose. He's a good cat. He follows me everywhere. He chuckled softly. Lenarius nodded. He loves you too. I can tell. He lets me know when you call to me. Ulysses took another sip of tea, the sweetness lingering on his tongue. You still don't answer? Len tilted his head. I helped Axe, like you asked. Ulysses' shoulders tensed. You did? As much as I could. Not because you asked, of course. But you did ask, coincidentally. He can be with Oscar now, and the others. And Ulysses paused, struggling with emotions that roiled in his chest. And are they happy? Axe? Oh, yes, he was. Len's words lingered in the air for a moment as he paused, thinking of the word before it slowly scrolled itself in the air in blue flames. He was ecstatic. Ulysses smiled weakly. That's good. He deserves that much. Oscar deserves that much. His family deserves to be happy. Happiness is hard to achieve in these times of war, Lenarius wrote sadly, taking a sip of his tea. You and I both know that. But they are happy together. All of them. Telkin took a moment to ask his next question, keeping his eyes on the horizon. In his peripheral vision, he could see the playground Oshi had once built for Oscar, which they had long since been forced to abandon. And what about you? Lenarius raised an eyebrow. What about me? He was going to make them say it. Of course he was going to make them say it. Ulysses wasn't sure if it was some kind of taunt or just the god purely being so foolish. So human. Ulysses fought to get the words out. Are you happy, Lenarius? With them? With your family? Lenarius looked at him for a long time, trying to read the scientist as much as the scientist was trying to read him. Yes, he wrote after a while. The words were less bright now, and the letters slightly smaller. Ulysses nodded. He reached up and wiped a tear from the corner of his eye as he sniffled. Does my happiness disappoint you? Ulysses let out a weak sound, caught between a laugh and a sob. I don't know. I want to say that it does. I feel like I should want you to suffer. I should want you to hurt as much as I do, but I don't. I want you to be happy, Len. I really do. He could feel the tears running down his cheeks now, and worse, he could feel the weight of the god's stare on his shoulders. I look at you and the forgiveness you've gained, the family you have, and I want it so badly. I want that happy ending, but I don't get it because I'm not the hero in this story, Lenarius. I'm starting to think that maybe I never was. I'm just a monster trying to be a god. Silence settled over the pair. Neither said a word. Neither sipped their drinks. The only sound, apart from the distant waves, were Ulysses' staggered, crying breaths. The heat of the sun sank lower towards the cold, shifting sea. I don't believe either of us to be heroes, Ulysses Themis, Lenarius wrote after a very long time. The god sighed. But that does not mean our stories cannot end well. Slowly, Lenarius stood up, finishing his tea as he moved to go back inside. Ulysses swallowed. Do you think you could ever forgive me for what I did to Virago? Lenarius looked down at the scientist, small and scruffy and sobbing, so far from the evil man who had once taunted him so harshly, who had once done so many vicious things. His gaze softened. No, he wrote in front of him. No, I do not think I can ever forgive you. But that does not stop me from wishing you happiness, Ulysses.